Listening as emotional intelligence. A psychological exploration of the most powerful social skill nobody actually practices. Chapter 1. The conversation you have already forgotten. You had a conversation today. Maybe several. You exchanged words with another human being, nodded at the appropriate moments, responded when it was your turn, and walked away believing that communication had occurred. But here is a question worth sitting with. Did you actually hear them? Not the words. You heard the words. Your auditory system captured the sound waves, converted them into neural signals, and delivered them to the language processing centers of your brain with remarkable efficiency. That part worked. That part always works, unless there is a physiological impairment preventing it. But hearing is not listening, and the distance between those two acts is where most human relationships quietly fall apart. Think about the last conversation you had with someone who was telling you something important, something personal, something that required them to open a door they usually keep closed. Maybe a partner describing a frustration they have been carrying for weeks. Maybe a friend admitting to something they are ashamed of. Maybe a colleague confessing that they are overwhelmed and do not know what to do. Now think about what was happening inside your mind while they were speaking. Were you fully present? Were you receiving their words with the kind of open, undivided attention that allows the full meaning, the meaning beneath the meaning, to come through? Or were you somewhere else? Were you formulating your response before they finished their sentence? Were you mentally categorizing their problem and preparing your solution? Were you comparing their experience to your own, waiting for the pause that would let you redirect the conversation toward your story, your perspective, your advice? Were you performing the appearance of listening while your mind was already somewhere else entirely? Be honest, not to feel guilty. Guilt is not the point. Awareness is the point. Because what you do in those moments, those small, seemingly insignificant moments when another person is trying to be heard, determines the quality of every relationship you will ever have. It determines whether the people in your life feel safe with you, whether they trust you with the parts of themselves that are fragile and unfinished, whether they come to you when it matters, or whether they learn, through repeated experience, that coming to you is an exercise in futility dressed up as connection. Listening is not a passive act. It is not the empty space between your responses. It is not the silence you endure while waiting for your turn to speak. Listening, when it is done with full presence and genuine intention, is one of the most powerful things one human being can offer another. It is an act of attention so complete that the person being heard feels, sometimes for the first time in a very long time, that they exist, that they matter, that the interior of their experience, the part that is usually invisible to the outside world, has been received by someone who chose to make room for it. That is emotional intelligence, not the ability to label emotions on a chart, not the ability to regulate your own reactions with mechanical precision, not the vocabulary of feelings or the theory of empathy. The real thing, the lived, practiced, relationship-altering ability to be fully present with another person's experience without needing to fix it, redirect it, minimize it, or make it about yourself. And it is far rarer than you think. Chapter 2. Why nobody taught you this. Consider for a moment how much of your education was devoted to teaching you how to communicate. You learned to read. You learned to write. You learned to structure arguments, present ideas, articulate positions, and speak persuasively. If you attended any kind of formal education, years of it were dedicated to output, to the production of language, to the art of making yourself understood. Now consider how much of your education was devoted to teaching you how to listen. The answer for virtually everyone is none. Zero. Not a single hour. Not a single lesson. Not a single moment in which someone sat you down and taught you how to receive another person's communication with the same care and skill that you were taught to produce your own. This is an extraordinary imbalance. Communication is, by definition, a two-way process. It requires a sender and a receiver. And yet our entire educational infrastructure is built around training senders. Receivers are left to figure it out on their own. And they do not figure it out, not most of them, because listening, real listening, is not intuitive. It does not come naturally. It does not improve automatically with age or experience. In fact, without deliberate cultivation, most people's listening actually deteriorates over time. They develop habits. They develop shortcuts. They develop patterns of pseudo-listening that look and feel like the real thing, but that are, upon closer examination, sophisticated forms of absence disguised as presence. The reason nobody taught you to listen is not that listening is considered unimportant. Everyone acknowledges, in the abstract, that listening matters. The reason is that listening is considered simple, automatic, a default state that requires no training because it requires no effort. This assumption is profoundly wrong, and it is the foundation upon which a staggering amount of relational damage is built. Listening is not the absence of speaking. It is an active cognitive and emotional process that requires sustained attention, the suppression of habitual responses, the regulation of your own emotional reactions, and the willingness to enter another person's frame of reference without immediately imposing your own. It requires you to tolerate not knowing, to resist the urge to solve, to sit with someone's pain without reaching for the nearest available escape hatch, whether that escape hatch is advice, reassurance, redirection, or the subtle hijacking of the conversation toward your own parallel experience. It requires, in short, a level of psychological discipline that most people have never developed. Not because they are selfish, not because they do not care, but because no one ever told them that this was a skill, that it could be learned, that it needed to be learned, that the difference between hearing and listening is the difference between standing next to someone and actually being with them. Chapter 3: The 5 Counterfeits. Before we explore what genuine listening looks like, it is worth examining what it does not look like. Because most people believe they are good listeners. And most people are wrong. Not because they are dishonest about their self-assessment, but because they are confusing one of 5 common counterfeits with the real thing. The first counterfeit is waiting. This is perhaps the most common form of pseudo-listening. The person appears attentive. They maintain eye contact. They nod. They make the small verbal sounds that signal engagement. But internally they are not receiving. They are cueing. They are holding their response in a mental buffer, polishing it, rehearsing it, waiting for the gap in the other person's speech that will allow them to deploy it. The experience of being on the receiving end of waiting is distinctive. You can feel it. There is a quality of impatience beneath the surface. A sense that the other person's attention is not on you but on themselves. A subtle but unmistakable vibration of readiness that communicates, without words, that what you are saying is being tolerated rather than received. The second counterfeit is advising. The person listens just long enough to identify the problem and then pivots immediately into solution mode. They offer suggestions, strategies, perspectives, and recommendations, often before you have finished describing the situation, and almost always before you have been asked whether you want advice at all. Advising feels helpful. It is often well-intentioned. But it carries a hidden message that most advisors do not intend and most recipients feel acutely. The message is, your feelings are a problem to be solved, not an experience to be understood. The advisor is not interested in what you feel. They are interested in making the feeling stop. And the fastest way to make a feeling stop is to bypass it entirely and jump to action. The third counterfeit is relating. This is the listener who hears your experience and immediately connects it to their own. Oh, I know exactly what you mean. The same thing happened to me when. The conversation pivots. Your experience becomes the springboard for their story. And within 30 seconds, you are no longer the speaker. You are the audience, listening to someone describe their version of something that was supposed to be about you. Relating feels like empathy. It is often motivated by genuine connection. The person is trying to say, I understand, because I have been there. But the effect is the opposite of what they intend. Because the unspoken message is, your experience is interesting to the extent that it reminds me of mine. Your story is valuable as a prompt for my story. You are a mirror, not a person. The fourth counterfeit is evaluating. This is the listener who receives your words through a filter of judgment. Not necessarily negative judgment, although that is common, but any form of assessment that categorizes your experience before it has been fully expressed. That was not very smart. You should not feel that way. You are overreacting. That is not a big deal. Evaluating shuts down communication with surgical precision. The moment a person feels that their experience is being graded rather than received, they stop sharing. They retract. They learn, quickly and permanently, that this person is not a safe audience for their inner life. The fifth counterfeit is deflecting. This is the listener who cannot tolerate the emotional weight of what is being shared, and so redirects the conversation toward lighter territory. Let's not dwell on that. Look on the bright side. At least it's not as bad as. You know what you need? A night out, Deflecting is almost always motivated by discomfort. The listener is not indifferent to your pain. They're overwhelmed by it. They do not have the capacity to sit with it, and so they attempt to move both of you to higher ground. The intention is kind. The effect is abandonment, because the person who is trying to share something difficult has just been told, in the gentlest possible way, that their difficulty is unwelcome here. These 5 counterfeits, waiting, advising, relating, evaluating, and deflecting, account for the vast majority of what passes for listening in everyday human interaction. They are so normalized, so habitual, so universally practiced that most people do not recognize them as failures of listening. They recognize them as listening itself. And that misrecognition is why so many people feel profoundly alone, even when they are surrounded by people who care about them. Chapter 4. What it actually feels like to be heard. Now let us talk about the real thing. Not the theory of it, not the definition. The felt experience of being genuinely listened to. Because it is a specific experience. It has a texture. It has a quality that is unmistakable to the person receiving it, and that is, once experienced, impossible to confuse with any of the counterfeits. When someone truly listens to you, something happens in your body before it happens in your mind. There is a release, a softening, a dropping of tension that you may not have realized you were carrying. Your breathing deepens. Your shoulders lower slightly. Your voice, which may have been tight and controlled, begins to find a more natural rhythm. You feel safe. Not safe in the physical sense. Safe in the psychological sense. Safe enough to say the thing you were not sure you were allowed to say. Safe enough to explore the thought you were not sure made sense. Safe enough to be confused, contradictory, emotional, uncertain, without the fear that any of those states will be used against you or dismissed as invalid. And something else happens. Something that is more difficult to describe, but that anyone who has experienced it will recognize immediately. You begin to understand yourself better. This is the paradox of genuine listening. The person doing the listening is not providing answers. They are not offering interpretations. They are not telling you what your experience means. They are simply receiving it, fully, openly, without agenda. And in the space created by that reception, you begin to hear yourself more clearly. You say something and then pause, surprised by what came out of your mouth. I didn't know I felt that way until I said it. You follow a thread of thought that you would not have followed if you were speaking to someone who was waiting, advising, relating, evaluating, or deflecting. You reach a clarity that was not available to you in the privacy of your own mind, but that emerged, almost magically, in the presence of someone who was willing to simply be there. This is not magic. It is psychology. The act of being heard activates cognitive processes that are suppressed by the anticipation of judgment. When you expect to be evaluated, your mind becomes defensive. It curates. It filters. It presents only the version of your experience that is most likely to be accepted. This curation prevents you from accessing the deeper, messier, more honest layers of your own thinking. When that expectation of judgment is removed, when you are in the presence of someone who is clearly, palpably, not going to judge, the curation stops. The filters relax. And what comes through is not the polished, audience-ready version of your experience. It is the raw material, the unprocessed truth, the stuff you did not even know was there until someone made enough room for it to surface. This is why good therapy works. Not because therapists have secret knowledge about the human mind, but because they have been trained to do something that almost nobody else in your life does consistently. They listen, without agenda, without judgment, without the reflexive need to fix, redirect, or relate. They create a space of such complete reception that you become capable of hearing yourself for the first time. But this capacity is not the exclusive property of therapists. It is available to anyone who is willing to learn it, practice it, and offer it to the people in their lives. And the people in your life are starving for it, whether they know it or not. Chapter 5. The Neuroscience of Being Received. What happens in the brain when a person feels genuinely heard? This question has been explored through neuroimaging studies that examine brain activity during experiences of social connection and social rejection. And the findings illuminate why listening is not just a nice relational skill, but a fundamental human need with measurable physiological consequences. When a person feels heard, understood, and emotionally received, several things happen neurologically. The prefrontal cortex, the brain region associated with executive function, self-reflection, and complex social processing, shows increased activation. This suggests that being heard enhances cognitive function. It does not just feel good. It makes you think better. The experience of being received opens cognitive channels that are narrowed or closed by the experience of being dismissed. Simultaneously, the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, shows reduced activation. This is significant because the amygdala is the structure responsible for generating the fight or flight response. When it is highly active, the brain prioritizes survival over reflection. Nuance disappears. Defensive reactions dominate. Complex thought becomes difficult. When someone listens to you with genuine presence, your amygdala calms down. Your nervous system shifts from a defensive state to a receptive one. You become more capable of processing complex emotions, more capable of seeing multiple perspectives, and more capable of arriving at insights that would have been inaccessible in a state of threat. This is why arguments escalate when neither party feels heard and de-escalate when one party begins to genuinely listen. The listening does not just change the social dynamic. It changes the neurological state of the person being heard. Their brain literally shifts from threat mode to processing mode. And in processing mode, resolution becomes possible. There is also evidence that being heard triggers the release of oxytocin, the neurochemical associated with bonding, trust, and social connection. This means that the act of listening does not just make the other person feel better emotionally. It activates the biological machinery of attachment. It deepens the bond at a physiological level. It creates trust not through words or promises, but through the felt experience of being received. And the reverse is equally true. When a person consistently feels unheard, when their attempts at communication are met with advising, deflecting, evaluating, or any of the other counterfeits, the brain registers this as a form of social rejection. And social rejection activates the same neural circuits as physical pain. This is not a metaphor. Neuroimaging studies have demonstrated that the experience of being dismissed or ignored produces activation in the anterior cingulate cortex and the anterior insula, regions that are also activated by physical injury. Being unheard hurts. Literally, neurologically, measurably, and the pain of it accumulates. Each instance of being talked over, dismissed, interrupted, redirected, or responded to with a solution when what was needed was presence, each instance deposits a thin layer of withdrawal. Over time, the layers build, and the person stops trying, not because they stopped needing to be heard, but because the cost of trying became greater than the cost of silence. This is how people disappear from their own relationships. Not through conflict, not through a dramatic exit, through the slow, quiet, heartbreaking process of learning that their interior life is not welcome here. Chapter 6. Why listening is so difficult. If listening is so powerful, so important, so neurologically beneficial for both the listener and the speaker, why do so few people actually do it? The answer is that genuine listening requires you to do several things that are psychologically uncomfortable. And your brain, which is optimized for efficiency and self-protection rather than relational depth, resists every one of them. The first discomfort is the suppression of the self. Genuine listening requires you to temporarily set aside your own thoughts, your own reactions, your own experiences, your own agenda, and make room for someone else's. This is not natural. The brain is a self-referential organ. Its default mode, when not focused on a task, is to cycle through self-related thoughts. Your plans, your worries, your memories, your identity. Asking the brain to stop doing this, even temporarily, requires active cognitive effort. It requires discipline. It requires the same kind of deliberate, practiced self-regulation that is required for meditation, for delayed gratification, for any act of overriding the brain's default impulses. Most people do not realize that listening requires this level of effort. They assume it is passive. They assume it happens automatically. And when they find their mind wandering, as it inevitably does, they do not recognize this as a failure of discipline. They recognize it as boredom. They assume the speaker is not interesting enough, rather than recognizing that their own attention is not disciplined enough. The second discomfort is the tolerance of emotion. When someone shares something painful, your body responds. Mirror neurons activate. Your own emotional system generates a faint echo of the other person's distress. And that echo is uncomfortable. It creates an impulse to make the discomfort stop, to fix the problem, to offer a solution, to redirect towards something lighter, to do anything other than sit still inside the shared emotional space and allow it to exist without intervention. This impulse is not selfish. It is self-protective. Your brain is trying to reduce your own discomfort, and it disguises this self-protection as helpfulness. I'm just trying to help. I just want to make you feel better. These statements are sincere, but they're also often the brain's way of saying, your pain is activating my pain, and I need it to stop. Genuine listening requires you to override this impulse, to stay in the discomfort, to let the emotion exist in the space between you without rushing to dissolve it, to trust that the other person does not need you to take their pain away. They need you to be willing to be near it. The third discomfort is the surrender of control. Listening means you do not know where the conversation is going. The other person is leading. They may circle. They may contradict themselves. They may go somewhere unexpected. They may say something that triggers a strong reaction in you. And you have to let it happen. You have to follow rather than steer. You have to relinquish the position of navigator and accept the position of passenger. For many people, this is deeply uncomfortable, particularly for people who have built their identity around competence, problem-solving, and the ability to manage situations effectively. Listening feels like passivity to them. It feels like doing nothing. And doing nothing, in a culture that equates value with output, feels dangerously close to being useless. The fourth discomfort is the confrontation with your own limitations. When someone shares a problem that you cannot solve, a pain that you cannot fix, a reality that your advice cannot change, listening forces you to face the limits of your own power. You cannot make this better. You cannot take this away. You can only be here. And for many people, being here without the ability to change what is happening feels like failure. It is not failure. It is presence. And presence, far more often than solutions, is what the person in front of you actually needs. Chapter 7. The Architecture of Real Listening. So what does genuine listening look like in practice? Not in theory. Not as a concept. As a lived, moment-to-moment discipline that you can begin practicing today. It begins with intention. Before the conversation even starts, make a conscious decision about how you want to show up. Say to yourself, silently, something along the lines of, I am going to receive this person. I am going to make room. I am not going to fix. I am going to be here. This sounds simplistic. It is not. Intention sets the frame. It primes your cognitive system for reception rather than production. It creates a slight but meaningful shift in your neural orientation, turning the dial from broadcast to receive. And that shift, established before the first word is spoken, changes the quality of everything that follows. The second element is physical presence. Your body communicates your attention more honestly than your words ever could. Face the person. Make comfortable, natural eye contact. Put your phone away, not face down on the table where it can still vibrate and pull your attention, but out of sight entirely. Lean slightly forward. Open your posture. Let your body say what your mouth does not need to. I am here. You have my attention. This matters to me. The third element is the discipline of silence. Not uncomfortable silence. Not the empty silence of having nothing to say, but the generative silence that communicates. I am not going to rush you. I am not going to fill this space. Take the time you need. I will be here when you are ready. Most people underestimate the power of silence in conversation. They treat it as a void to be filled. They jump in the moment the other person pauses, often before the pause has served its purpose. Because pauses are not always endings. They are often beginnings. The person is gathering themselves. They are reaching for something deeper. They are about to say the thing that matters most, the thing that lives below the easy surface-level account. And if you fill that pause with your voice, they will never get there. The moment passes. The door that was opening closes again, and both of you lose something that was on the verge of existing. Let the silence breathe. Trust it. Do not fear it. The most important things a person will ever tell you will come after the pause you did not fill. The fourth element is reflective response. This is not parroting. It is not mechanically repeating back what someone said in slightly different words. It is the act of communicating, in your own genuine way, what you understood from what they shared. It sounds like you felt invisible in that meeting, and that the invisibility was worse than the actual disagreement. So the part that really got to you was not what he said, but the fact that nobody else in the room seemed to notice. You are not angry about the decision. You are hurt that you were not considered. These responses do several things simultaneously. They confirm that you were paying attention. They demonstrate that you understood not just the facts, but the emotional layer beneath the facts. They give the speaker the experience of being seen, truly seen, in a way that simple nodding and "I understand" never can. And they create an opportunity for correction. If you got it wrong, the speaker can redirect, and the act of clarifying often takes them deeper into their own understanding. The fifth element, and this is the one that separates competent listening from transformative listening, is the willingness to stay with the emotion rather than moving past it. When someone tells you something painful, there is a moment. A brief, crucial, easily missed moment in which the emotion is right there. In the room. Between you. Alive and present and palpable. And in that moment, you have a choice. You can move past it. You can acknowledge it briefly, and then transition to logistics, advice, next steps, or brighter topics. This is what most people do. This is the path of least discomfort. And it communicates, unintentionally but unmistakably, that the emotion was noted but is not welcome to stay. Or you can stay with it. You can let the moment extend. You can say something that honors the weight of what was just shared. That sounds incredibly lonely. I can hear how much that hurt you. You have been carrying this for a long time. And then you can be quiet, and let the person be in their feeling without performing recovery. Without pretending to be fine. Without rushing to the resolution. Staying with the emotion is where the real healing happens. Not because you're doing anything, but because your willingness to stay communicates something that no advice or solution ever could. It communicates, your pain is not too much for me. I am not going to run from it. You do not need to manage it for my comfort. It can exist here between us for as long as it needs to. That communication, offered consistently over time, changes people. It changes how safe they feel. It changes how deeply they are willing to share. It changes the quality of the relationship at a structural level, building a foundation of trust that no amount of good advice or cheerful encouragement could ever replicate. Chapter 8. Listening to what is not being said. There is a dimension of listening that goes beyond the verbal, beyond the words that are spoken, and into the territory of what is communicated but never articulated. Every person who speaks to you is simultaneously telling you two things. The first is the content. The facts, the story, the surface-level information they are conveying. The second is the subtext. The emotional reality beneath the content. The thing they are feeling but may not be naming. The thing they need but may not be asking for. And in most conversations, the subtext is more important than the content. When your partner says, "You never help around the house," the content is a complaint about domestic labor. The subtext might be, "I feel unseen. I feel like my effort is invisible. I feel like I am carrying this alone, and you do not notice." When your colleague says, "I just want to make sure we're on the same page," the content is a request for alignment. The subtext might be, "I feel uncertain about my position here. I am worried that I am being left out of decisions. I need reassurance that I matter to this team." When your friend says, "I'm fine, just tired," the content is a status update. The subtext might be, "I am not fine. I am exhausted in a way that sleep will not fix. But I do not believe you actually want to hear about it, so I am giving you the answer that will end this line of questioning." A person who listens only to content will respond to the words. They will defend themselves against the accusation about housework. They will provide the requested alignment update. They will accept the claim of tiredness and move on. A person who listens for subtext will respond to the feeling. They will hear the loneliness beneath the complaint, the insecurity beneath the request, the resignation beneath the deflection, and their response will be directed not at the surface problem, but at the deeper one, the one that actually matters, the one that, if addressed, will resolve the surface problem as a natural consequence. Listening for subtext is not mind reading. It is not projecting your own interpretations onto someone else's words. It is the practice of paying attention to tone, to emphasis, to what is omitted, to the emotional charge that certain words carry, to the discrepancy between what is said and how it is said. It is treating the words as a starting point rather than a destination. And it is checking your understanding rather than assuming it. You said you're fine, but you don't sound fine. What's actually going on? That question, asked gently and genuinely, is worth more than an hour of advice. Because it tells the other person that you are listening not just to their words but to them. To the whole of them. Including the parts they did not think anyone would notice. Chapter 9. Listening as a way of being. Everything we have discussed so far might suggest that listening is a technique, a set of skills to be deployed in specific conversational moments. And in one sense, that is true. There are practices, habits, and disciplines that can be learned and applied. But at a deeper level, listening is not a technique. It is a way of being. It is a fundamental orientation toward other people that says, "You are real to me. Your experience matters. Your inner world is as vivid and as valid as mine. And when you speak, I am going to treat your words not as obstacles between me and my next response, but as invitations into a reality that is different from mine and worthy of my full attention." This orientation is what the psychologist Carl Rogers called unconditional positive regard. It is the stance of receiving another person without conditions, without the requirement that they be reasonable before you listen, without the demand that they calm down before you engage, without the prerequisite that they frame their experience in a way that is comfortable for you. Unconditional positive regard does not mean you agree with everything someone says. It does not mean you abandon your own perspective. It does not mean you accept behavior that is harmful or tolerate treatment that is disrespectful. It means that you approach the other person's experience with the assumption that it is valid, that their feelings make sense within their own context, even if you do not fully understand that context, that they are doing the best they can with what they have, and that they deserve to be heard, not because they have earned it through good behavior or rational presentation, but because they are a human being who is trying to make sense of their life, just like you. This orientation changes everything. It changes how you enter conversations. It changes how you respond to conflict. It changes how people experience you. It changes the depth and quality of every relationship you are part of. People can feel the difference between someone who is using listening techniques and someone who genuinely wants to understand them. The techniques are visible when they are deployed without the underlying orientation. They feel mechanical, performative, like a customer service script recited by someone who is thinking about their lunch break. But when the techniques are grounded in genuine regard, when the silence is real, when the presence is real, when the willingness to stay with the emotion is real, the other person does not experience a technique. They experience something far more rare and far more valuable. They experience being met. Chapter 10. What changes when you listen? Let us talk about what happens in the long term when you begin to practice genuine listening. Not occasionally, not when it is convenient, but as a consistent, intentional practice woven into the fabric of your daily interactions. The first thing that changes is the quality of information you receive. People tell you more, not because you asked for more, because they trust you with more. They share the layers beneath the surface. They bring you the real problem instead of the polished version. They tell you what they actually think instead of what they think you want to hear. This changes your understanding of the people in your life in ways that are difficult to overstate. You begin to see the full person rather than the presented person. You understand their motivations, their fears, their aspirations, and their struggles with a clarity that was never available to you when your listening was superficial. The second thing that changes is the quality of your relationships. Conflict decreases, not because disagreements disappear, but because the underlying causes of most relational conflict, the feeling of being unseen, unheard, unvalued, are addressed before they accumulate into resentment. When people feel heard, they do not need to escalate. They do not need to repeat themselves with increasing volume. They do not need to weaponize their pain, because their pain has already been received. Trust deepens, not the surface trust of social pleasantries and mutual convenience. The deep trust that allows people to be vulnerable, to be imperfect, to bring their confusion and their shame and their uncertainty without fear of rejection. Intimacy increases, not the manufactured intimacy of forced conversations and scheduled check-ins. The organic, naturally emerging intimacy that develops when two people consistently make room for each other's full humanity. The third thing that changes, and this one surprises most people, is your own self-understanding. The practice of listening to others trains you to listen to yourself. The same skills that allow you to receive another person's experience without judgment, the presence, the patience, the willingness to sit with discomfort, these skills are transferable inward. You begin to hear your own emotions with greater clarity. You begin to notice your own reactions with greater precision. You begin to understand your own patterns, your own triggers, your own unmet needs, with a depth that was not available to you when your internal listening was as superficial as your external listening. Listening makes you smarter. Not in the sense of accumulating more information. In the sense of processing information with greater depth and nuance. When you truly listen to someone who sees the world differently than you do, you are not just being polite. You are expanding your cognitive map. You are adding data points that your own experience alone could never provide. You are becoming more flexible, more adaptive, more capable of navigating a complex world. And the fourth thing that changes is something that is difficult to quantify, but impossible to ignore. You become someone people want to be around. Not because you are entertaining. Not because you have the best stories or the sharpest wit, but because people feel better in your presence. They feel more themselves. They feel more real. They feel, in your company, a quality of attention that is so rare in modern life that encountering it is almost disorienting. You become a sanctuary. Not a therapist. Not a guru. Not a problem solver. A sanctuary. A place where another person's experience can land safely. Where it can be seen without being judged. Where it can exist without needing to be fixed. That is not a small thing. In a world where most people feel chronically unseen, chronically misunderstood, chronically alone inside the noise of their own unwitnessed lives, becoming a person who truly listens is an act of profound generosity. And it costs you nothing. Nothing except the willingness to be present. To be patient. To let someone else's reality be as important, for a few minutes, as your own. Conclusion: the gift that asks nothing. We live in a world that is saturated with communication and starved of connection. A world where everyone is broadcasting and almost nobody is receiving. Where conversations are competitions. Where responses are preloaded before sentences are finished. Where the phone on the table hums its constant invitation to be somewhere other than here. In this world, the act of genuine listening is almost revolutionary. Not because it is complicated. It is not. Not because it requires special training. It does not. Not because it demands superhuman patience or extraordinary emotional capacity. It demands only what every human being already possesses but rarely chooses to deploy. The willingness to be fully here. With this person. In this moment. Receiving what they are offering without needing to shape it, solve it, or redirect it. That is the gift. And it is a gift that asks nothing in return except your presence. The next time someone speaks to you, try something different. Do not prepare your response. Do not categorize their problem. Do not relate it to your own experience. Do not evaluate it. Do not rush to fix it. Just listen. Listen with your body. Listen with your silence. Listen for what is said and for what is not. Listen until the other person has finished, truly finished, not just paused for breath. And then before you speak, ask yourself one question. Did I hear them? Not the words. Them. If the answer is yes, then whatever you say next will land differently. It will carry the weight of genuine understanding. It will communicate, beneath its content, something that no technique or strategy can manufacture. The message that says, I was here. You were not alone. And what you shared mattered to me. That is emotional intelligence. Not as a concept in a textbook. Not as a competency on a performance review. As a lived practice. As a daily choice. As the quiet, unglamorous, extraordinarily powerful decision to give another human being the rarest gift in modern life. Your full attention. Start there. See what changes. You will not be disappointed. Thank you for listening. Till next time on North Audiobooks.